There's a kind of person who walks into a room and feels everything. The tension no one mentions, the sadness hiding behind smiles, the anger wrapped in politeness. We call them empaths. We celebrate them as gifts to the world, as rare souls with supernatural sensitivity. But Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, who mapped the invisible architecture of the human psyche, saw something else entirely. He saw the scar tissue of a childhood that demanded they become emotional translators just to survive. You've probably been told you're too sensitive, that you absorb other people's emotions like a sponge, that you can sense when something's wrong before anyone says a word. And you've wondered, haven't you? Is this a gift, or is this exhausting me to death? Here's the uncomfortable question that most people never ask. What if your empathy isn't a spiritual gift at all? What if it's a wound that learned to walk upright and call itself virtue? I know that might sting, but stay with me, because in the next 50 minutes, I'm going to show you something that will fundamentally change how you see yourself. Not to make you less caring, but to free you from the prison of caring in all the wrong ways, for all the wrong reasons, at the cost of your own life force. Carl Jung spent his career exploring what he called the undiscovered self, the vast interior landscape we all carry, but rarely have the courage to explore. He understood that we're not just shaped by what happened to us, but by what we made of what happened to us. Our psyche doesn't just respond to trauma. It organizes around it, creating entire personality structures designed to manage what couldn't be managed when we were small and powerless. And this brings us to 3 truths that most people never connect. Truth number 1. Most empaths aren't born. They're forged in emotional fires where love was conditional, unpredictable, or entirely dependent on their ability to read the room and adjust accordingly. Truth number 2. What looks like natural sensitivity is often hypervigilance, a finely tuned nervous system trained by years of unpredictability. When you couldn't predict whether mom would be warm or cold, whether dad would be present or explosive, whether affection or abandonment was waiting behind the next closed door, you learned to scan for emotional weather patterns the way others scan for physical danger. Truth number 3. True empathy and trauma-based caretaking look identical from the outside. Both involve deep sensitivity, both involve caring about others' pain, both involve putting others first. But one liberates and connects. The other imprisons and depletes. And if you don't know the difference, you'll spend your entire life giving from an empty cup and calling it love. To understand how this happens, how a child's survival mechanism becomes an adult's identity, we need to go back. Not to your childhood yet, but to Switzerland in the 1950s, where Jung sat across from a patient who seemed endlessly compassionate, endlessly giving, perpetually exhausted, and utterly unable to explain why her goodness felt like a curse. Before we dive deeper, if this resonates with your soul's journey, please hit that like button and subscribe for more transformational content. Your support helps this message reach other souls who need to hear it. Picture this. A woman sits in Jung's consulting room. Everyone in her life describes her as selfless, understanding, the person you call when you're in crisis. She's proud of this reputation. But she's also drowning in a depression she can't name, exhausted by relationships that demand everything and return nothing, and secretly furious at everyone she's helping, which makes her feel like a terrible person. Jung listened to her describe her endless caretaking, her inability to say no, her belief that her worth depended on being needed. Then he said something that changed her life. You have made yourself a servant to avoid becoming yourself. That sentence cracked something open, because it revealed the function beneath the virtue. Her empathy wasn't just kindness, it was a defense mechanism. It was a way to stay safe by staying useful to avoid abandonment, by becoming indispensable to skip over the terrifying question of, who am I if I'm not helping someone? Jung understood what many therapists still miss today, The psyche creates what he called a persona, a social mask we show the world, and beneath that mask, we exile everything we learned was unacceptable into what he called the shadow. And beneath all of that, buried under layers of conditioning and survival strategies, is what he called the self, the authentic organizing center of who we really are. For the empathic person, the persona is the helper, the understanding one, the person who never has needs and never causes problems. The shadow contains everything: forbidden rage, selfishness, need, boundaries, the desire to be cared for instead of always caring. And the self, the true self, becomes so deeply buried that many empaths reach midlife without ever asking what they actually want. There's a line Jung wrote that haunts me. In each of us, there is another whom we do not know. That other is often the child we used to be before we learned that love was something we had to earn through emotional labor. So how does this happen? How does a child become so devoted to others that they disappear from their own life? Let me take you into the childhood laboratory where empaths are made. Picture a home. It doesn't have to be dramatically abusive. In fact, it often isn't. It's just emotionally unpredictable. Maybe there's a parent struggling with depression who can't see their child's needs because they're drowning in their own. Maybe there's a parent with anxiety who needs constant reassurance, turning the child into their emotional support system. Maybe there's rage that erupts without warning, teaching the child to read micro-expressions the way a meteorologist reads storm patterns. Maybe there's just emotional absence, a parent who's physically there, but emotionally checked out, and the child learns that the only way to get attention is to intuit what the parent needs and provide it. In this environment, the child makes a discovery that will shape the rest of their life. My feelings make things worse. Their feelings are my responsibility. If I can sense their mood and manage it, I'll be safe. If I have needs, I'll be too much. If I'm angry, I'll be abandoned. If I cry, I'll be shamed. But if I can become the tiny therapist, the little emotional firefighter, the one who soothes and anticipates and adjusts, then I might earn something that resembles love. And here's what's crucial to understand. This child isn't weak. This child is brilliant. They're doing sophisticated emotional labor that most adults can't manage. They're developing real skills in reading subtext, managing conflict, and intuiting unspoken needs. The sensitivity is real. The caring is real. But it's being built on a foundation of fear, not love. It's compulsory, not chosen. It's survival, not service. Jung called these patterns complexes, emotional knots that form around wounds and then operate with their own gravity, their own logic, pulling us into familiar patterns even when we consciously want something different. The mother complex, the father complex, the abandonment complex, these aren't abstract concepts. They're the heartbeat of memory. They're the reason you keep dating the same person in different bodies. They're the reason you can't set a boundary without feeling like you're committing murder. They're the reason Carl Jung, empath, and personal development work is so essential, because without understanding these unconscious patterns, we're just repeating our history and calling it fate. As this child grows into an adolescent, and then an adult, the persona solidifies. They become known as the empathic one, the good listener, the person everyone confides in. They're praised for it. They build their identity around it. But beneath that praise is a growing exhaustion, a simmering resentment they can't admit, and a terrifying emptiness when they're alone because they've never learned to be with themselves, only with other people's emotions. The adult empath walks into relationships like a laboratory of transference and projection. New faces awaken old knots. The emotionally unavailable partner recreates the distant parent. The friend who only calls when they need something recreates the dynamic where love equaled usefulness. The boss who demands perfection recreates the environment where their worth was conditional. And instead of recognizing this as repetition, they see it as evidence that they're meant to be the helper, that this is just who they are, that their purpose is to save others from the darkness they themselves are drowning in. Here's where it gets really uncomfortable. Jung wrote something that sounds harsh, but is actually profoundly compassionate. Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. Let me unpack that because it's the key to everything. Legitimate suffering is the pain of being human. It's needing something and not getting it. It's being angry and having to sit with that anger instead of fixing everyone else to discharge it. It's being disappointed. It's asking for help and risking rejection. It's setting a boundary and surviving the guilt. It's the grief of accepting that your childhood cannot be redone, that some wounds don't fully heal, that you're imperfect, and so is everyone else. Substitute suffering is the pain you choose instead of that legitimate pain. For the empath, substitute suffering looks like this. Instead of feeling the legitimate pain of, I need to be seen and I'm not being seen, you focus on everyone else's pain. Instead of feeling the legitimate suffering of, I'm angry at how I've been treated, you become the person who never gets angry, who understands everyone, who makes excuses for people who hurt you. Instead of facing the grief of, my parent couldn't love me the way I needed, you try to earn that love from everyone you meet for the rest of your life. The substitute suffering feels safer because you can control it. You can't control whether someone will love you, but you can control how useful you are. You can't control whether you'll be abandoned, but you can make yourself so indispensable that abandonment seems less likely. You can't control the chaos of your authentic emotions, but you can lose yourself in managing everyone else's. But here's the trap: the substitute suffering never satisfies. It never resolves the original wound. It just extends it. Every time you sacrifice yourself to keep someone happy, you're telling that little kid inside you that their needs still don't matter, that they're still too much, that love is still something that must be earned through pain. And the more empathetic you become in this wounded way, the farther you drift from what Jung called the self, the organizing center of wholeness, the authentic core that knows what you want, what you need, what you will and won't tolerate. Because the self demands something brutally simple: you have to live from your own center, not from the void of others. You have to tell the truth even when it disappoints people. You have to disappoint people. You have to be ordinary. You have to be flawed. You have to let people experience the consequences of their choices instead of rescuing them. You have to risk being seen as selfish, which for most empaths feels like death. So you avoid it. You stay in the pattern. You call it virtue, and you slowly, quietly disappear from your own life. Now we go deeper. Now we meet the parts of yourself you've been running from since childhood. Let's talk about the shadow, one of Jung's most radical and misunderstood concepts. The shadow isn't evil. It's not your dark side in some moral sense. The shadow is simply everything you learned was unacceptable and therefore exiled from your conscious awareness. For most empaths, the shadow is packed with things that are actually healthy and necessary. Anger, boundaries, selfishness need the ability to say no, the capacity to prioritize yourself, the permission to be imperfect. Your shadow specifically contains the rage at being used, at not being truly seen, at the unfairness of giving so much and receiving so little. It contains the desperate, hungry need to be cared for the way you care for others. It contains the natural human selfishness that wants what it wants without apology. It contains your judgment of people who take without giving judgments you can't own because you've made yourself the perpetual giver. It contains your exhaustion, your resentment, your fantasy of just disappearing and letting everyone figure out their own problems for once. And because you can't consciously own these feelings, they leak out sideways. They show up as passive aggression, as martyrdom, that subtly manipulates, as mysterious illnesses that force you to rest because you won't choose rest, as burnout that crashes your system because you won't listen to the whispers. They show up in your attraction to narcissists, people who act out the selfishness you've disowned, who demand to be centered in a way you never let yourself be, who fascinate and repel you because they're living the shadow you can't integrate. Jung warned us, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. When you refuse to acknowledge your shadow, it doesn't disappear. It just gains power. It starts running your life from behind the curtain. And often the most destructive thing your shadow does is ensure you keep choosing relationships that recreate your original wound, because the psyche would rather repeat a familiar pain than face an unfamiliar healing. But there's another layer to this that people rarely talk about: the golden shadow. Not everything in your shadow is dark. Sometimes we exile our power, our voice, our bigness, our capacity to take up space. The empath who was told they were too loud as a child now speaks in whispers. The empath who was punished for their anger now fawns and appeases. The empath who was shamed for their needs now performs independence even when they're falling apart. These exiled strengths live in the shadow, too waiting to be reclaimed. Now let's talk about how these patterns, these complexes, actually operate in your adult life. Imagine you're in a relationship and your partner seems distant. Immediately, there's a familiar feeling in your body: panic, dread, a dropping sensation in your stomach. This isn't really about your partner right now. This is the abandonment complex activating. Suddenly, you're back to being the child who learned that distance meant danger, that withdrawal meant you did something wrong, that you need to fix it immediately, or you'll be left. So what do? You overfunction. You become extra attentive, extra giving, extra accommodating. You do the emotional labor of two people. You manage their mood, anticipate their needs, make yourself smaller so they'll stay. You lose yourself completely in the process. And the whole time, you're not actually relating to the person in front of you. You're relating to the ghost of the parent who made you earn love through emotional contortion. The original wound says, if I'm not perfect, they'll leave. The present reality is, I'm an adult and I can survive being left. In fact, sometimes leaving or being left is the healthiest thing. But the complex doesn't know this. The complex is frozen in the age you were when the wound formed, and it's running your adult relationships with a child's logic. Or here's another one. You keep dating emotionally unavailable people. The kind who are sometimes warm, sometimes cold, who give you just enough to keep you hoping, who make you work for scraps of affection. Why? Because they're a perfect replica of the parent who couldn't see you, and your psyche is trying to finally win that original love. The difference is, as a child, you needed that parent to survive. As an adult, you're choosing people who recreate the wound because somewhere deep down, you believe that if you can just do it right this time, if you can just be enough, you'll finally get the love you were owed. But that's not how it works. You can't heal a childhood wound with an adult relationship. You can only heal it by becoming the adult your inner child needed all along. Until you make the unconscious conscious, until you see these patterns for what they are, they will direct your life, and you'll call it fate. You'll say, I just have bad luck with relationships, or I guess I'm just meant to be the helper, or I'm just too sensitive for this world. But it's not luck. It's not destiny. It's repetition. It's the psyche's desperate attempt to heal the wound by recreating it, which is like trying to heal a broken bone by breaking it again in the same place. Let's talk about the persona more directly, that social mask you've been wearing so long you might have forgotten it's not your face. For the empath, the persona is the understanding one, the helper, the person who never needs, never demands, never disappoints. This persona is how you've learned to be acceptable, lovable, safe in the world. And here's the thing, the persona isn't bad. It's necessary for social functioning. We all have one. The problem is when you become the mask so completely that you lose the face beneath it. when being the helper isn't something you do, but the only way you know how to be. And beneath that persona, buried and waiting, is what Jung called the self, not your ego, not your personality, but the organizing center of your wholeness, the axis around which your entire being could rotate if you'd let it. The self doesn't demand perfection. It doesn't need you to be good all the time, or helpful all the time, or understanding all the time. The self demands only one thing: truth. Your truth. The truth of what you want, what you need, what you will and won't accept, what you're angry about, what you desire, what frightens you, what you refuse to keep pretending, doesn't matter. The terror of accessing the self is this: if I'm not the helper, who am I? If I have needs, will anyone stay? If I'm angry, does that make me a bad person? If I prioritize myself, am I selfish? If I set boundaries, will I die alone? These questions feel life-threatening. And this is the portal. This is where transformation becomes possible, because you can't become whole without walking through the terror of not knowing who you'll be on the other side. Here's one more concept that will blow open your understanding of why your relationships feel so exhausting: transference and projection. Jung understood that we don't really see people. We see our projections onto them. We see them through the lens of our history, our wounds, our unmet needs, our unintegrated complexes. This is how Carl Jung, empath, and personal development intersects with every relationship you've ever had. The empath projects fragility onto others. You see people as more helpless than they actually are, because you're projecting your child self onto them, the child who couldn't manage alone, who needed saving, who was overwhelmed by life. So you try to save everyone the way no one saved you. You project responsibility onto yourself. You see yourself as more responsible for others than you actually are, as if you're the parent who should have been there for you. You've internalized the parentified role so deeply that you can't relate to people as equals. You can only relate up serving them or down managing them. You project urgency onto others' needs while minimizing your own. Their crisis is an emergency. Yours is an inconvenience. This isn't nobility. It's the hierarchy of worth that was programmed into you when you learned that your needs made you a burden. And in every new relationship, you engage in transference, unconsciously treating this new person as if they're someone from your past. The new boss becomes the critical father. The new friend becomes the needy mother. The new partner becomes the parent who couldn't show up. And you respond to these ghosts, not to the living, breathing person in front of you. When you stop projecting, you stop being responsible for fixing everyone. When you stop transferring, you stop reenacting your childhood in every relationship. And that's when you can finally start relating to people as they actually are, instead of as stand-ins for what you're still trying to heal. Let me offer you one final reframe before we move into the transformation, because I want you to hold this gently. Your empathy, yes, the part that grew from pain, is sacred. It's real. You did develop genuine sensitivity. You can truly sense and care in ways that many people can't. That's not fake. That's not nothing. But as long as it's compulsive, as long as you don't have a choice about whether to engage it, as long as you can't turn it off when you need to, as long as it depletes you instead of flowing from fullness, then it's a wound, not a gift. It's a survival mechanism that you're still living inside. Jung wrote about the archetype of the wounded healer, the one who can heal others precisely because they know pain intimately. But here's the part that often gets skipped. The healer who hasn't healed themselves becomes toxic. They heal from woundedness instead of from wholeness, and they unconsciously perpetuate the cycle. They create dependent relationships because they need to be needed. They enable dysfunction because they're terrified of being unnecessary. They exhaust themselves to burnout because rest feels like abandonment of their post. The difference between wounded helping and whole helping is consciousness. It's choice. It's the ability to say, I care about you, and I'm choosing not to help right now because it wouldn't serve either of us. It's the capacity to witness someone's pain without absorbing it, to offer support, without sacrificing yourself to walk away, when it's not your responsibility without guilt eating you alive. That's where we're going. That's the alchemy. Now we enter the hardest part. You've seen the trap. You've met your shadow. You've named your complexes. You understand the function beneath the virtue. But understanding isn't transformation. Knowledge isn't integration. This is where the real work begins, and it requires something that might feel impossible. You have to let the old self die. Jung was obsessed with alchemy, not because he believed you could turn lead into gold literally, but because alchemical transformation was the perfect metaphor for psychological transformation. The alchemists described a three-stage process: negredo, albedo, rubedo, blackening, whitening, reddening, dissolution, purification, and integration, death, clarity, and rebirth. Let's walk through what this looks like for the empath trying to become whole. Negredo. The blackening is the death of the false self. This is when everything you thought made you good starts to look like a defense mechanism. This is when you realize that much of what you called love was fear. This is when you face the grief of recognizing, I've been abandoned by myself most of all. I've betrayed myself over and over in the name of being good. I've disappeared from my own life. This stage is brutal, and there's no way around it. You can't skip the grief. You can't bypass the darkness with positive thinking or spiritual platitudes. You have to feel the legitimate suffering you've been avoiding your entire life. The rage at what you didn't get, the grief of the childhood you deserved, but never had the terror of not knowing who you are. Without the mask, the shame of having needs, the loneliness of realizing that many of your relationships were transactional and will not survive your healing. This is the stage where everything falls apart, where the old strategies stop working, where you can't just fix your way out of the pain. And it's sacred. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of wanting to give up and go back to the familiar prison sacred. Because you're composting the false self into soil for something real. Albedo, the whitening, is when clarity emerges from the darkness. You start to see the patterns without the shame. You understand, I wasn't bad. I wasn't weak. I was brilliant at surviving. That child did the best they could with the tools they had. The complexes made sense. The persona was protection. The shadow was the repository of everything I couldn't safely express. It all made sense. It all served a purpose. And now that purpose is complete. This is where you start to integrate your shadow. Not by becoming a selfish asshole, but by reclaiming your healthy selfishness, your right to have needs, your permission to be angry when something's wrong, your capacity to set boundaries without guilt. You start to dialogue with the exiled parts of yourself instead of running from them. You ask your anger, what are you protecting me from? You ask your need, what do you want me to know? You ask your exhaustion, what am I refusing to accept? The shadow starts to lose its charge. The complexes don't disappear, they become integrated, which means you can see them activating and choose whether to follow them or not. You develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold the tension between opposites without collapsing into either extreme. I can be compassionate and boundaried. I can care and say no. I can be sensitive and strong. I can love you and leave you. Both and instead of either or. Rubedo, the reddening, is when life force returns, when passion comes back, when color bleeds back into a world that's been gray. This is when the emotions you exiled for so long change function. Anger becomes discernment, the capacity to know what's yours and what's not. Need becomes advocacy, the ability to ask for what you want without apology. Fear becomes wisdom, the instinct that protects instead of paralyzes. boundaries become love made visible. The prima materia, the base material the alchemists started with, was often described as worthless, disgusting, the thing people threw away. That's how you've seen your anger, your need, your selfishness, your messy humanity. But the alchemists knew the gold isn't outside. It's in the prima materia itself. It's in the very things you've been trying to transcend or escape or perfect away. Your wholeness includes the dark. Your gold is forged in the furnace of what you thought was worthless. Now let's get practical. Because transformation isn't just poetic, it's a practice. Here's how you actually do this work. Step 1. Name your complex. Get a journal and ask yourself, what pattern repeats in my relationships? Not just the surface pattern, but the emotional signature. Is it panic when someone pulls away, rage when you're not appreciated, emptiness when you're alone? Trace it back. When did you first feel this? What was happening? Who taught you this response? This isn't about blame, it's about clarity. When you can name it, you can work with it. Step 2. Dialogue with your shadow. Jung developed a technique called active imagination, where you engage directly with the unconscious. Write a letter to your anger. Ask it, what are you trying to protect me from? Then write back from your anger's perspective. You might be shocked at what emerges. Do the same with your need, your exhaustion, your resentment. These aren't enemies to defeat. They're messengers you've been ignoring. Step 3. Reclaim your projections. Notice who you judge harshly. That's often your disowned self looking back at you. Notice who you idealize. That's often your disowned power. Ask yourself, what part of me am I seeing in them? This is humbling work because it means the very things you criticize in others are alive in you, just hidden. And the very things you admire in others are available to you, just disowned. Step 4. Test your boundaries. This is where rubber meets road. Start small. Say no to one thing this week. Notice what happens in your body. The guilt, the anxiety, the fear of abandonment, it will all come up. Don't fix it by rescinding the boundary. Sit with it. Breathe through it. This is how you rewire your nervous system. This is how you teach yourself that you can disappoint someone and survive it. Step 5. Feed yourself, not just your persona. The persona wants to be useful, acceptable, admired. The self wants truth, pleasure, authenticity, rest, play, desire. Ask yourself daily, what do I actually want right now? Not what should I want. Not what would make me good, but what do I want? And then this is the hard part, give it to yourself. Schedule 1 hour a week that's just for you, where you're not producing anything or serving anyone. Let yourself be gloriously unproductive and notice what happens. Now, I need to tell you something that might hurt. Some of your relationships aren't going to survive your healing. Some of them were built entirely on your woundedness. When you stop over-functioning, when you stop rescuing, when you stop making yourself small, some people are going to be angry. They're going to say you've changed, and they won't mean it as a compliment. They're going to miss the old you, the one who centered them, served them, never challenged them. This isn't failure. This is alignment. In the concept of Carl Jung empath and personal development, there's a recognition that growth sometimes requires loss, Jung said. The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. If only one person is transforming and the other is resisting, then it's not a meeting, it's a performance. And you're done performing. You'll find that relationships fall into 3 categories. First, relationships that transform, where both people are willing to grow, to challenge each other, to update their dynamic. These are the relationships worth fighting for. Second, relationships that resist, where the other person wants the old you back, where they guilt you for changing, where your growth threatens their comfort. These relationships need to be renegotiated or released. Third, relationships that naturally complete where you realize you were together for a season, not a lifetime, and that's okay. Let them go with gratitude. There will be grief here. Real grief. Because letting go of martyrdom means letting go of the identity it gave you. You might lose people who only loved your usefulness. You might lose the story of yourself as the good one, the helper, the one who sacrifices. You might lose the secret pride of being the most empathetic person in the room. And underneath all of that, you're letting go of the last fantasy that if you just do it right, if you just give enough, you'll finally get the love you deserved as a child from the people who couldn't give it then and can't give it now. But here's what I need you to hear: you will survive this. The child couldn't have survived losing those people. That's why they adapted, why they became what they needed to become, to stay safe. But you're not that child anymore. You're the adult. And adults can survive disappointment, loss, being alone, being ordinary, being imperfect, being rejected. Not only can you survive it, you can actually be okay on the other side of it in a way you've never been okay before. And on the other side, there's a completely different kind of empathy waiting for you. Let's talk about what true empathy actually looks like. Compulsive caretaking says, I must fix you to feel okay myself. I must absorb your pain because I can't tolerate your discomfort. Your healing is my responsibility. Your feelings are my problem. If you're upset, I've failed. If you're struggling, I need to rescue you. I can't rest until you're okay, and even then, I'm scanning for the next crisis. Conscious compassion says I care about you deeply, and I also care about me. I can witness your pain without absorbing it. I can hold space for your struggle without fixing it. Your healing is your responsibility, and I trust you to do it. Your feelings are valuable information for you, not problems for me to solve. I can offer support without sacrificing myself. I can walk away when it's not my responsibility without guilt destroying me. You see the difference? It's not about caring less. It's about caring consciously from a place of fullness rather than from a place of fear. It's about what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. The capacity to be both compassionate and boundaried, both caring and self-preserving, both empathetic and separate. This is maturity. This is what wholeness actually looks like. And here's the ultimate healing, the thing that makes everything else possible. You have to become the inner parent to your inner child. You can't go back and get the childhood you needed. You can't force your actual parents to suddenly become who they couldn't be. You can't rewrite your history, but you can do something just as powerful. You can become the adult who parents your inner child right now, in real time, every day. Here's how this works practically. When you feel that familiar panic rising when someone's upset, and you immediately go into fix-it mode when you sense distance, and you start to collapse into people-pleasing when a boundary needs to be set, and you feel like you're going to die. Pause. Take a breath. Ask yourself, how old do I feel right now? Most of the time, you'll realize you don't feel like an adult. You feel 5 or 7 or 12. That's the complex activating. That's the child who's afraid, who remembers that love was conditional, who learned that their safety depended on managing everyone else's emotions. And instead of letting that child run your adult life, you speak to them. You say, I've got you. You're safe. I'm the adult now. I can handle this. You don't have to fix anyone to be loved. Your needs matter. I'm not going anywhere. This isn't metaphor. This is reprinting. This is meeting the wound at its source and providing what was missing. And every time you do this, every single time, you're changing the neural pathways, you're updating the story, you're teaching yourself that you're not that helpless child anymore. You're the adult with agency, with choice, with the capacity to survive what the child couldn't. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And who you truly are is not the wound. not the complex, not the persona, not the compulsive caretaker. Who you truly are is the self, whole, imperfect, capable of both darkness and light, able to love without losing yourself, able to care without collapsing, able to be sensitive without being a sponge, able to help without needing to be needed. That's where we're going. That's what's waiting on the other side of this alchemy. So what does life actually look like on the other side? What changes when you've done this work, when you've integrated your shadow, when you've reparented your inner child, when you've reclaimed yourself from the prison of compulsive caretaking? You're still empathic. That doesn't go away. The sensitivity is real, it's part of who you are. But now it's a capacity you have, not an identity that has you. You're not the empath as a wound badge you wear. You're a whole person with the capacity for deep empathy, and you choose when and how to engage it. The shift is profound. Before, you felt everything because you had to in order to survive. After, you feel deeply because you're naturally sensitive, and you choose which emotions to engage with and which to let pass through. Before, your empathy ran on autopilot, activating anytime someone was in pain. After, you can witness someone's pain without making it yours. You can care without fixing. You can say, "I see you're struggling, and I trust you to handle this," without guilt. Here's what actually changes in your day-to-day life. You walk into a room, and you still sense everything: the tension, the unspoken conflict, the sadness someone's hiding. But it doesn't override your center anymore. You notice it the way you'd notice the temperature or the lighting, as information, not as a command to act. Someone shares their pain with you, and you listen with genuine care, but you don't carry it home in your body. You don't spend the next 3 days worrying about them, trying to fix their problem, depleting yourself to save them. You offer help, but only when you genuinely want to, not from obligation. And here's the shocking part: when you help from wholeness instead of woundedness, it actually helps more, because you're not unconsciously creating dependency, you're not enabling, you're not doing for others what they need to do for themselves. You're supporting growth instead of preventing it. You set a boundary, and the guilt still comes, but it lasts minutes instead of days. It doesn't control you anymore. You've learned that guilt is often just the old program trying to run, and you can acknowledge it without obeying it. You can say no and let someone be disappointed and survive it. You can prioritize yourself and not feel like a monster. You can be ordinary, flawed, human, and that's enough. You ask for what you need, and you don't apologize for existing. This might be the biggest miracle of all. You can say, "I need support," or "I need space," or "I need you to show up differently," without the shame that used to swallow those words before they could form. You've learned that having needs doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. And the right people will meet you there. The wrong people will leave. And both of those outcomes are okay. Rest becomes possible. Real rest, not just the exhausted collapse after you've given everything away. You can actually be still, be alone, be unproductive, without the anxiety that you're failing at your purpose. Because your purpose is no longer to save everyone. Your purpose is to be yourself fully and authentically, and to connect with others from that fullness. Relationships become reciprocal, not perfectly balanced every moment, but over time there's a give and take that feels mutual. You're not the only one listening, the only one helping, the only one accommodating. And if you notice yourself falling into that pattern, you can catch it early. You can say, "I'm over-functioning again," and course correct before you disappear entirely. You've integrated your shadow, which means the emotions you exiled are now available to you as information and energy. Anger tells you when a boundary has been crossed. Instead of swallowing it and developing a mysterious illness, you feel it and you address it. Need tells you what you're hungry for. Instead of projecting it onto others by trying to fulfill their needs, you own it and you ask for what you want. Fear tells you when something genuinely isn't safe. Instead of creating false safety by controlling everyone around you, you trust your instincts and you remove yourself when necessary. Your complexes are still there, they don't disappear. But they're integrated, which means you can see them activating. And you have a choice about whether to follow them. When you notice yourself going into fix-it mode, you can pause and ask, is this my responsibility? Is this serving anyone, or is this just my abandonment complex trying to keep me safe the only way it knows how? And then you can choose differently. Jung said, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking." You're no longer using empathy as power over yourself, to stay safe power over others, to keep them close power to avoid facing your own needs and pain. You're letting real love in. Love that includes yourself. Love that doesn't require pain as the price of admission. Love that can be gentle and boundaried and honest and whole. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. You've done that. You've seen the parts of yourself you thought were unacceptable, and you've learned they're just human. You've met your shadow and discovered it wasn't a monster, it was the parts of you that got exiled for your protection. You've honored the child who had to become an emotional translator to survive, and you've freed that child from having to do that job anymore. This transformation isn't the end, it's the beginning. Jung called the lifelong process of becoming whole individuation, and it doesn't have a finish line. New layers will emerge. New wounds will surface. New patterns will reveal themselves. But now you have the map. You know how to meet yourself in the darkness instead of running from it. You know how to integrate instead of exile. You know how to choose consciousness over pattern, wholeness over performance, truth over acceptance. And you're not alone in this. Others are waking up to the same truth, that empathy born from trauma isn't the same as empathy born from wholeness, that sensitivity can be a gift when it's not a survival mechanism, that you can care deeply without disappearing from your own life. Your transformation gives permission for others to transform. Your healing creates space for collective healing. Every time you choose yourself, you're showing someone else that they can choose themselves too. If you want to go deeper into this work, there are resources. Jung's own writings, especially Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and The Undiscovered Self, are profound. Find a trauma-informed therapist who understands attachment theory and can help you reparent your inner child. Explore somatic practices, yoga, breathwork, body-based therapy, because the wound doesn't just live in your mind. It lives in your nervous system, and it needs to be healed there too. But more than anything, trust the process. Trust that you don't have to have it all figured out. Trust that healing isn't linear, that you'll have days where you fall back into old patterns, and that doesn't mean you've failed. Trust that becoming whole doesn't mean becoming perfect, it means becoming real. Trust that you're exactly where you need to be, even when it feels like you're lost. Trust that the darkness you're walking through is the path, not an obstacle to the path. Let me bring us full circle to where we started. You are an empath. That's real. That sensitivity, that capacity to feel deeply, that ability to sense what others are experiencing, that's part of who you are. And it's beautiful. But the difference now, the transformation, is this. You're not an empath because pain made you one. You're an empath because you survived pain and you chose to stay open anyway. And now you're choosing, not performing, not proving, not earning your right to exist through endless service. Choosing. The child who learned love through pain is still inside you. They always will be. But they're no longer driving. They're no longer running your relationships from the back seat, desperately trying to keep you safe by keeping you small. You are driving now. The adult you, the integrated you, the you who can feel everything and also know where you end and others begin. The you who can love without losing yourself. The you who can help without needing to be needed. The you who can set a boundary and survive the guilt. The you who can ask for what you want and accept whatever answer comes. The you who is finally home in your own body, your own life, your own truth. That child learned that love appears only when they hurt, when they sense another's pain and heal it before it can even speak. But you've learned something different now. You've learned that real love doesn't require pain as currency. That real love includes you. That real love can be gentle, mutual, reciprocal, honest, boundaried, and whole. You've learned that your sensitivity isn't a punishment or a burden, it's a gift, but only when you're not sacrificing yourself to justify it. So here's my invitation to you: keep going. Keep choosing yourself. Keep disappointing people when necessary. Keep setting boundaries. Keep asking for what you need. Keep integrating your shadow. Keep dialoguing with your complexes. Keep reparenting that inner child. Keep becoming more whole, more real, more yourself, not in some narcissistic, selfish way, but in the deeply ethical way of refusing to betray yourself anymore. If this video resonated with you, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment and tell me, what was the moment that hit hardest? What pattern did you finally recognize in yourself? What are you ready to change? Let's create a space in the comments where we're all getting free together, where we're witnessing each other's transformations, where we're reminding each other that healing is possible. And you don't have to do it alone. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's exhausted from giving, someone who can't figure out why their goodness feels like a curse, someone who's finally ready to stop performing empathy and start living it consciously, share this with them. Send it to them, not with an explanation, just with "this made me think of you." Sometimes that's all someone needs to know. They're not crazy, they're not broken, they're just ready to become whole. Subscribe to this channel if you want more content that breaks you open in the best way. Content that doesn't just make you feel good, but actually transforms how you see yourself and your life. Because that's what we're building here, a community of people who are willing to look at the uncomfortable truths, willing to do the real work, willing to become whole, even when wholeness requires letting go of who we thought we had to be. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. Thank you for being willing to look at yourself with this level of honesty. Thank you for choosing to become whole. The world needs empaths who are healing from their empathy, not empaths who are drowning in it. The world needs your sensitivity when it flows from fullness, not from fear. The world needs you, the real you, not the performed version, not the mask, not the wound walking upright. You. Now go live it. Go be it. Go choose yourself. And remember, you're not the child who has to hurt to be loved anymore. You're the adult who can love and still remain within yourself.